Christians are the army. The Jews are the Marines. Okay? Because remember, I'm calling for war. I'm calling for us to stand up and not be the abused wives of Islam. In Nashville, here's what I find. Every church has a small handful. This obviously doesn't apply at this church. By the way, it is highly unusual for me to speak in the main hall of a church. Remember, they don't want to be in the same room with me. As a matter of fact, Maurice, the guy who told me, Bill, they don't want to ever meet you. They are afraid of you. His next piece of advice was, you need to have front men. You need to have agents. You need to have your own working in front of you because they're afraid of you. Now, although I talk a lot, I can also listen. So I got to thinking on the problem. The leadership is weak and afraid. We have within the church, a lot of churches, a handful of people who are not afraid. And so I created a concept called Gideon's Army. What I do is in Nashville, I bring together members of all churches. I don't care if you're Catholic. I don't care what you are. By the way, it's an interesting thing. Christians make a great deal of theological difference between themselves. Islam makes no distinction between the Pope and an evangelical. It is not capable of making any distinction. It doesn't even have the language to describe the theological differences that Christians indulge in. So therefore, I don't care. So what I do is I bring together people from different churches to discuss a common problem. How do they teach their church from a minor position? And problems are talked about. And we've learned a lot of things. And so tactics are discussed. People can come together and work on a common problem. Now, what I have learned about teaching Islam is this. The part that I have given you here today is the food for big kids. Okay, you need to have a certain amount of strength to even face this kind of information. Because this, the more you think about what I've told you, the more your brain is going to go, ah! This is food for the big kids. We don't want to start them off with that because I've learned they can't swallow this kind of red meat. Okay? Compassion. That's where we go. So what we do is we bring into churches apostates who are now Christians. Even into Methodist churches we've done this. While the bishop is selling out in one of the Sunday school rooms, we have 300 people listening to 4 former Muslims who are now Christian. What are they going to say to the Kurdish woman? You don't know anything about Islam? You don't read Arabic? No. She knows all of this. Okay? And so they have to listen. And by the way, the stories of apostates who have come to the church, I've heard some of them over and over again, and I still want to cry. They move the heart. See, the first part I was talking to you about is all for the head. We need to go for the heart. Okay? So that's one of the things we do. The other thing we bring into churches are Christians from Islamic lands. I was going to give a lecture at a church. It was a series of 5 lectures called The Foundations of Islam. I was unloading my books. Books are heavy. Unloading my books, and here comes a man across the parking lot. I looked at him and I said, Nigerian, I've got my first Muslim coming to this series. He walked up, he introduced himself, and he was a Nigerian, and he was a former Muslim. And he said, could I come to your lecture? Sure. I mean, I'll lecture to a hall of Ayatollahs. I don't care who I talk to. Transgendered, I don't care. Obama voters, I don't care. Sure, come in. So I gave the lecture, 45 minutes of questions, and then the gentleman raised his hand and said, "Can I speak?" Sure. I was kind of wondering what he was going to say, because obviously he had come this distance to say this. And he introduced himself, gave his name, and then he said, "I am a former Muslim from northern Nigeria." He said, "I know Islam." He said, "I have come to tell you Christians this. You have met Muslims and find them to be nice people. And you have reached the conclusion that Islam is nice. I tell you, you have not known Islam until you know it when it is strong. They will have their Sharia, and you will see the true final face of Islam." Now he said, "I want to talk to you as Christians." He said, "This nation used to be called a Christian nation. But he said it cannot be called that anymore because the Christians no longer have the strength, the will, and the power, and the fervor to base a nation on." My eyes are getting bigger. Here's the pastor. He said, "You in America have made Christianity something that can be done for 1 hour on Sunday so you'll feel good for 7 days. I tell you, this is not Christianity." This took about 10 minutes. When he got through, he got a standing ovation. Now remember, this church was already strong enough to invite me into the front of the room and go through 5 lectures. Well, it was time for the show to end. That was real clear. That was the final act. But the white guy sitting next to him says, "May I speak?" And I said to him, "You're going to try to follow that?" He said, "I want to tell you more about this man. He is from the royal house of Nigeria. And he's had 3 assassination attempts." You bring men like that into a church, and they change it. Not a person in that church would say to him, "Well, you don't know the real Islam. Do you read Arabic?" What do you say to such a man? You shut up and you listen. That's what you do. Because he's talking to you here. So that's part of what Gideon's army does. We introduce the church to the suffering caused by Islam, by former Muslims, and those who are from persecuted lands. Now, our whole goal is to feed them enough milk that we can give them the raw red meat. So that is part of what I'm doing called Gideon's Army. Christians must become missionaries to the church. And real missionaries no longer need to take a plane. They need to work their own zip code. There is something called the Crescent Project, run by Fouad Masri, in which he teaches how to be a missionary to Islam. I maintain that Christians need to at least listen to Fouad Masri on how to convert Muslims. The Great Commission must be brought to bear. Everybody knows what I mean? Go ye into all the world. It turns out, I learned this yesterday from a Methodist, that the head of the Methodist Church has entered into negotiations, I may have already said this, with Said Said, and has agreed that Methodists will not proselytize amongst Muslims. How is it that a bishop looks at his own gospel and says, well, the footnote, go ye into all the world, except Islam, and preach the gospel, we're going to keep it that way. That becomes the official gospel. We will not proselytize amongst Muslims. Remember, I started off with the minister, the man who wrote the book, in which he said, I would never want to maintain that Christianity is better than Islam. Those are the near enemy. Those people must be dealt with. And I ask you, who better to deal with such people than Christians?